I always thought snow could heal anything. The way it blanketed everything in clean white silence, like a fresh start made visible. That's what I told myself when we landed in Aspen, Colorado, the mountains rising like something out of a fairy tale, our breath curling into clouds as we stepped onto the icy tarmac. This would be our Christmas miracle. A real holiday, a white one, spent with Brian's parents in the kind of snowy paradise you only see in postcards. I wanted this to work. I needed it to. We arrived at the cabin just before sunset, the sky glowing lavender and gold behind the peaks. Strings of lights wrapped around the porch posts, glowing like tiny stars. Inside, the fire crackled, and the air smelled of pine, cinnamon, and the faintest hint of brandy. Marlene, Brian's mother, stood by the fireplace, draped in a cashmere shawl, her expression unreadable as we entered. Gerald sat in a leather armchair like he owned the mountain, nodding once when Brian introduced me again, as if we were meeting for the first time. "You're here," Marlene said, more observation than welcome. Brian gave me a quick smile, that kind of half-hopeful, half-apologetic smile that used to make me feel seen. "They're just traditional," he'd told me before the trip. "Reserved. But this will be good for all of us." I smiled back at them, smoothing down my coat. "Merry Christmas," I said, but the greeting fell into the silence like a rock dropped into snow, no echo, no warmth. Later that evening, we went to the lodge's welcome dinner. I'd spent an hour getting ready, curling my hair, putting on the green velvet dress Brian said brought out my eyes. I wanted to look festive, like family. But when we arrived, Gerald waved down the hostess before she could lead us to our table. "She'll sit over there," he said, gesturing to a small table tucked in the corner. Not even facing the fireplace or the window view, just a two-seater by the bar, half in shadow. I turned to Brian, confusion flickering through me like static. "What's going on?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's just how they do things. Don't make it weird." "How they do things?" I repeated. He gave me that look again, pleading, tired. As if I were being unreasonable for not wanting to be banished to a corner like an afterthought. I waited for him to laugh, to take my hand and guide me back to the table with the others, to say of course she's with us, she's my wife. But he didn't move. He just turned and followed his parents to the main table, 3 places set, 3 wine glasses gleaming under the chandelier. So I sat alone. The waitress asked if I wanted wine. I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek as I stared across the room at my own husband, who never once looked back. I picked at my salad while they laughed and clinked glasses. Occasionally, Gerald would throw his head back and let out that booming laugh Brian inherited. Marlene's voice was a soft purr, only occasionally lifting into amused surprise. They looked like a painting, elegant, content, perfectly polished in their matching cashmere. I couldn't taste a thing. The buttered rolls, the roast duck, even the creme brulee I usually loved, it all sat heavy in my mouth like ash. I finished my wine and asked for another. When the dinner ended, Brian finally made his way over, carrying his coat. "Ready to go?" I blinked at him. "That's it? You're not going to say anything?" He sighed. "Natalie, please don't make this a thing." I stared at him, heat flushing my cheeks, though the room was cold. "It is a thing. Your father made me sit at a different table. Your mother didn't even say hello. They're old-fashioned. It's their way. Can you just let it go? Let it go. Like my pride, my hope, my belief that this trip was a chance for something better. That if I tried hard enough, smiled bright enough, they'd see me as more than the woman who took their son." In the cabin that night, I lay awake while Brian snored gently beside me. Snow fell outside, brushing the windows like feathers, and the room glowed faintly with the light from the fireplace down the hall. I wanted to cry but didn't. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the ceiling, feeling the warmth of the bed and the cold inside me wage quiet war. In the morning, Marlene passed me in the hallway without a word, her silk robe sweeping past my flannel pajamas like royalty ignoring the help. Gerald was already on the porch, sipping coffee. Brian followed them both like an obedient shadow. I smiled tightly and poured myself a mug of coffee no one offered me, then sat by the window alone. The snow outside was beautiful, soft, endless, untouched. I had imagined this trip so many times. I pictured fireside laughter, long talks over cocoa, maybe even Marlene showing me how to make her famous cranberry tart. I'd imagined Gerald telling stories, Brian wrapping an arm around me proudly as he told them, "She's the best thing that ever happened to me." I thought this would be the Christmas where they finally saw me. Really saw me. Instead, I had become the ghost in the room. Present but invisible. Tolerated, not welcomed. And what hurt most was that Brian didn't seem to mind. Not enough to change it. Not enough to stand up and say I mattered. As I sat in that chair, the steam curling from my mug, I realized something. This wasn't just a rough start. This was the beginning of something much colder than the snow outside. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to stick around to see how deep it would go. I stopped expecting warmth by the second day. It wasn't even that I hoped for kindness anymore. I just wanted acknowledgement. A glance, a nod, something that made me feel less like an unwanted guest and more like someone whose presence mattered. But the silence had already settled into the wood-paneled walls of the cabin like smoke. No one spoke to me unless necessary. No one invited me anywhere. They just lived their holiday around me, as if I were furniture. Breakfast was always a quiet affair, if I was even awake for it. They never told me what time they planned to eat. The first morning, I came down to find 3 empty plates and the lingering smell of sausage and maple syrup. They were already outside by the time I poured my own coffee. I watched them from the window, all bundled up in designer ski gear, laughing as they trudged toward the car with their equipment. I didn't even know they had ski passes. I turned to Brian that evening when we were finally alone in the bedroom. "You didn't tell me about skiing." He pulled his shirt off and shrugged like it didn't matter. "You're not much of a skier." "That's not the point. You didn't even ask if I wanted to go." He tossed his jeans in the corner. "They didn't think you'd be interested." "They?" I repeated. "What about you?" Brian gave me a tired look, the same one he always used when I brought up anything that didn't fit neatly into his version of normal. "They have their ways, Nat. Just let them be." I sat on the edge of the bed, the warmth of the fireplace behind me doing little to ease the chill that had burrowed under my skin. "Do you even care that I'm spending this entire vacation alone?" He sighed and slid under the covers. "I care, but I'm not going to fight with them over little things." Little things. Apparently, being excluded from every meal, every outing, every conversation was a little thing. A misunderstanding, a tradition, something to be tolerated. By the third day, I didn't even ask anymore. I just made my own breakfast in the quiet kitchen, cleaned up my dishes, and wandered the nearby trails alone. The snow was knee-deep in some places, untouched and glittering under the bright Colorado sun. It should have felt magical. But every crunch of my boots against the snow echoed with a kind of loneliness I hadn't expected. I had never felt so far from home, even though technically, I was here with family. Except I wasn't. Not really. When I came back one afternoon, cheeks red from the cold, I noticed Marlene's scarf draped over the chair, her gloves drying by the fire. I hadn't even seen them leave that day. It wasn't until I sat down to warm up that I opened my phone and saw the photos. Elise had tagged them, Brian's cousin. There they all were, smiling in a horse-drawn sleigh, bundled in plaid blankets, sipping cocoa. The caption read, "Family Christmas Ride Through Aspen." Family. No Natalie in sight. I scrolled through the comments, each one a knife. "Beautiful. You all look amazing. What a perfect holiday." Perfect. Without me. I put the phone down slowly, the screen going black as if trying to shield me from the truth I already knew. I wasn't family. Not in their eyes. I was a shadow clinging to Brian's arm, a woman who dared to think she could ever belong. That night, Brian returned late. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes bright. The sleigh ride was incredible. The snow god, it was like a movie. I just stared at him. "You didn't think to invite me?" He paused mid-step, as if the idea had only just occurred to him. "It wasn't really my call." "Not your call," I repeated flatly. They already had it planned. It was tight. He started pulling off his gloves, setting them on the dresser. "You know," I said quietly, "I see all of it." I know they're doing it on purpose. I'm not stupid. I never said you were. They're trying to freeze me out. And you're just letting them. He turned, face tightening. What do you want me to do, Natalie? Tell them how to behave in their own house? Pick fights every day? I want you to stand up for me, I said, my voice breaking despite my best effort to hold it steady. He sighed, sitting heavily in the armchair. It's just a week. Can you not blow this up into something it's not? I laughed bitterly. It's not just a week. It's a pattern. Every day, I wake up and realize I'm not part of any of this. Brian looked away, jaw tightening. You're overreacting. But I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. My chest ached with the sharp truth of it. This wasn't just about cold shoulders or missed invitations. This was about being erased, little by little, until there was nothing left of me in this picture-perfect holiday. I started keeping track after that. The missed texts. The dinner outings I found out about only afterward, when Marlene posted photos of her wine glass and Gerald's favorite dish. The spa day where Elise shared snapshots of cucumber masks and fluffy white robes. All without me. I confronted Brian again, quietly, on the cabin's back deck where the snow muffled our voices. He just shook his head. They're not used to including outsiders. Outsiders, I whispered. Is that what I am to you? He didn't answer. That night, I didn't join them for dinner. No one asked where I was. I sat by the fireplace in the chalet's small library, reading the same paragraph 3 times before giving up. My chest felt tight, as if I'd been holding my breath for days. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and endless. And I realized, in that silence, that I could disappear tomorrow and none of them would notice. They weren't even being subtle anymore. They didn't want me here. And maybe, just maybe, neither did Brian. By the 5th day, I stopped pretending. Pretending to be surprised when they left without me, pretending to enjoy my solitary walks in the snow, pretending to be unaffected by the way Brian barely looked at me anymore. I had hoped the cold outside would numb me, but instead, it sharpened everything, each word left unsaid, every closed door. Every time I caught my reflection in the frosted windows and saw a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. That night, they were all at the lodge's holiday party. I watched them leave, dressed in shimmering winter whites and deep forest greens, laughing as if nothing was broken. Brian didn't even bother asking if I wanted to come. He'd said, "It's probably better if you just take the evening to yourself," like he was doing me a favor. I waited until their laughter faded down the snowy path before I moved. Calmly, methodically. My fingers didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. It was strange, this peace that settled over me like the snowfall outside. It wasn't joy. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. I pulled out my laptop and logged in. I had made all the reservations for this trip, something Brian was quick to offload, claiming he was too busy. So I had handled everything. The chalet, the spa, the sleigh rides, the Christmas Eve dinner at the exclusive mountaintop restaurant that required booking months in advance. All of it was in my name. Every detail tied to my accounts, my confirmation numbers, my credit card. I clicked through the tabs, one by one. First, the chalet. The screen asked if I wanted to cancel. Yes! A pop-up warned me that canceling would forfeit the remainder of the stay. I clicked confirm without hesitation. Next, the spa appointments, Marlene's massages, Gerald's facial treatments, even Brian's hot stone therapy. All gone with a few keystrokes. The sleigh rides. Cancelled. The Christmas Eve dinner that Brian had made a point to brag about to friends cancelled. With every confirmation message, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was reclamation. Of space. Of voice. Of power. They had spent the entire week pretending I wasn't here. Now, they would feel it. I moved quietly through the chalet after that. Packed my bags with careful hands. I didn't cry. I didn't rush. I folded each sweater, each scarf, placed them in my suitcase with the same calm that had guided my mouse across the screen. I looked around once more before I zipped it shut. This place had been beautiful in theory, warm fire, elegant decor, snow-covered charm. But beauty meant nothing when it was used to freeze you out. Brian's suitcase sat by the wall, untouched. His scarf still hung over the back of a chair. A faint trace of his cologne lingered in the room. For a second, I let myself remember the beginning, the man who made me feel chosen, who whispered dreams of starting our own traditions. I had believed in those dreams once. But I wasn't going to be the woman who clung to someone who left her out in the cold. I left the cabin without a sound. The snow was falling in thick, soft flakes, coating everything in fresh silence. I loaded my suitcase into the SUV and slid into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my back. I took one last look at the cabin. They were still at the party. Still laughing. I didn't even leave a note. The road down the mountain was quiet, winding, serene in the kind of way only winter nights could be. The SUV's headlights cut through the dark, illuminating snowbanks and pine trees, making the world look like it had been dipped in silver. The drive to Denver would take a few hours, but I didn't mind. With every mile I put between me and Aspen, I felt myself thaw. I stopped once to fill the gas tank and buy a hot chocolate. The gas station was nearly empty, the air frigid as I stepped out into the night. Inside, the cashier gave me a polite nod, probably assuming I was just another traveler heading home for the holidays. If only he knew. Back in the car, I cradled the warm cup between my hands and took a long sip. I could taste the cocoa, the marshmallows melting into it. It was the first thing that tasted real all week. By the time I reached Denver, the snow had slowed to a gentle flutter. The city lights shimmered beneath the clouds like a secret waiting to be kept. I checked into a luxury hotel downtown, one I'd always wanted to try. The lobby was decorated in tasteful gold and evergreen, soft music playing under the twinkle of chandeliers. The concierge smiled without hesitation, offering me mulled wine and a warm cookie at check-in. It was the first smile I'd received in days. When I entered the suite, I stood by the window and looked out at the snow-covered streets. The fireplace flickered on with the touch of a button. My bags sat neatly by the door. I hadn't said a word to Brian. Not yet. I slid my phone from my coat pocket, set it on the coffee table, and stared at it for a long moment. Part of me expected it to ring, to buzz, to explode with messages. Nothing. They were still at the party, probably assuming I'd fallen asleep with a book by the fire. I sat down on the plush armchair, my legs curled under me, and watched the city. I imagined them returning to the chalet, their cheeks red from the cold, their coats damp with snow. Marlene would complain about the icy roads. Gerald would grumble about the bartender. Brian would glance around, realizing the fire was out, the lights dim. My suitcase gone. No Natalie. And then, slowly, they'd try to check in online for their spa treatments. Try to scan their room key. Try to confirm the dinner reservation. And nothing would work. Not a single thing. I took another sip of cocoa and smiled to myself. They had spent a week pretending I didn't exist. Now they would know exactly what that felt like. The fire in the suite crackled softly, casting golden shadows across the room as I curled deeper into the oversized armchair. The hotel robe swaddled me like a warm cocoon, and the hot cocoa in my hands smelled of cinnamon and nutmeg. Denver glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, streets quiet, snow falling in slow, graceful spirals. For the first time in days, maybe longer, I felt warm from the inside out. No one had called yet. Not a single text. No angry voicemail. No barrage of demands or weak apologies. And I knew why. They hadn't discovered it yet. But they would. I took a long sip from the mug, savoring it. That sweetness, the warmth that wrapped around my throat like a scarf, it was a small but powerful reminder that I was still here. I still had choices. And I had made one. By noon, the first ripple came. My phone buzzed sharply against the coffee table. I didn't rush to grab it. I let it vibrate again, then again, until it went silent. Only then did I pick it up. Brian. 5 missed calls. 1 voicemail. I played it on speaker, calm and detached, as if I were listening to someone else's life unravel. Natalie, he said, voice clipped and loud, like he was trying not to scream, but didn't know how to hide it anymore. What the hell is going on? We got locked out of the chalet this morning. Our keys just stopped working. Gerald thought it was a mistake, but then the front desk said the reservation was canceled. They said it was under your name. And then the spa, Marlene's appointments are all gone. My dinner confirmation's gone too. Did you cancel everything? Natalie, where are you? Call me. I smiled. So they'd finally felt it. I pictured them in the lobby, Marlene's perfectly gloss lips twisted in outrage, Gerald barking demands, Brian trying to smooth things over like always. But for once, he couldn't. Because this time, he couldn't pass it off as a misunderstanding. Couldn't placate them with vague excuses and keep me quiet in the corner. I had taken their comfort away, and now they had to sit in their own discomfort. I hit delete on the voicemail and leaned back, stretching my legs over the ottoman. The sweet smelled of eucalyptus and cedar, and the fire popped like it was celebrating with me. I reached for a pastry from the complimentary breakfast tray and bit into it slowly, eyes drifting toward the snowy sky. The phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. Where are you? Brian barked, skipping past any greeting. You just left? You canceled everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I just said, you wanted me separate. Now you are. The line went silent for a beat. I could almost hear the gears in his head grinding, trying to shift the blame, to reframe the moment into something he could control. Natalie, come on, he said finally, lowering his voice. You can't just run off and sabotage the whole trip. I laughed once, dry and short. I didn't sabotage anything, Brian. I removed myself from a place I was clearly never welcome. I just took my reservations with me. You're being dramatic, he snapped. Am I? Because I spent 5 days eating alone, walking alone, watching you pretend not to see me. You didn't even ask if I wanted to go on the sleigh ride. It wasn't personal. Everything about it was personal. Natalie, he said, trying to soften it now, you should have talked to me. We could have worked it out. I stood and walked slowly toward the window, my reflection barely visible in the glass. I did talk to you. I told you every single day how they made me feel. And you did nothing. I just didn't want to cause a fight, he muttered. No, Brian, I said quietly. You just didn't want to disappoint them. Another long pause. Are you in Denver? He asked. I didn't answer. He huffed, frustrated. You can't just leave me stranded here. You're not stranded. You're with your family. That's what you wanted, right? That's not fair. Neither was spending Christmas treated like a ghost. There was a hollow silence on the other end, filled only by his shallow breathing. I don't even know what to say to you, he muttered. Then don't say anything, I replied, and ended the call. I dropped the phone onto the table and exhaled slowly, letting the silence refill the room. It didn't hurt the way I thought it might. I didn't feel guilt or regret. Just clarity. I ordered lunch from room service, something warm and indulgent, and spent the next hour flipping through holiday movies on the suite's giant flat screen. I picked one at random, a cheesy Christmas romance where the girl gets swept off her feet in a small town with twinkling lights. I didn't need the fantasy, but it was better than listening to my thoughts repeat old wounds. When lunch arrived, I thanked the server with genuine warmth and tipped well. It felt good to offer kindness, even if I hadn't been shown any lately. Maybe especially because of that. Later that afternoon, I drew a hot bath, dropped a peppermint soak into the steaming water, and slid beneath the surface until the world faded. No one could reach me here. No cold stares. No dismissive shrugs. No more being treated like a mistake. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline and the suite filled with dusk, my phone had stopped buzzing. Maybe they were regrouping, trying to salvage what was left of their holiday. Maybe they were panicking. Maybe for once, they were questioning themselves instead of blaming me. I wrapped myself in a thick towel and stood by the window, the city lights blinking like fireflies. A soft smile curved my lips. They thought I would crumble. But this time, I had left the table before they even noticed I was standing. It was sometime after midnight when the message came. I'd just finished brushing my hair, the last of the cocoa-scented conditioner fading into the air, when my phone lit up on the nightstand. A single notification. One name I hadn't expected to see, Elise. Good for you, it read. They did the same thing to his ex-wife. I froze, mid-step on the plush carpet, the sentence reverberating through me like a struck bell. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart suddenly thudding harder than before. My thumb hovered over the screen before I tapped to expand the message. I figured you should know. It's not just you. Amanda went through the exact same thing. Gerald and Marlene iced her out every chance they got. Brian let it happen. Just like now. I assumed you knew. I'm sorry. Amanda. I remembered the name from a passing comment months ago. A short-lived mention Brian had made over dinner, something about how they'd grown apart. He hadn't spoken of her since, and I hadn't pressed. Now I felt a deep, familiar ache curling in my chest, one I'd ignored too many times before. That ache that comes when everything starts making sense, and you suddenly realize the storm didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building the whole time. I stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, "Why didn't anyone say anything before?" Elise replied almost instantly. "I thought he told you. I thought you knew what happened. Amanda left after one Christmas. Just vanished. No one gave her a chance. Everyone said she was too sensitive." I bit my lip. My stomach twisted. A wave of nausea, anger, and clarity rolled through me all at once. Too sensitive. The exact phrase Gerald had used when I asked him if there was anything I could do to get to know Marlene better. "She's just not used to sensitive women," he'd said, like that was a flaw. Like empathy and openness were something to outgrow. I remembered Brian brushing my hair back and saying I was strong, that they'd come around. He knew. He'd always known. And he let it happen. I set the phone down, my hand suddenly clammy, and walked to the minibar. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I poured a glass of red wine and brought it back to the bed, needing something to anchor me. My mind was racing. Amanda had been me. Or maybe I had been her from the start. And Brian had already rehearsed the role he was now playing again, the passive partner, the quiet bystander. He had watched someone he loved be stripped down and shoved out, and he hadn't stopped it then either. Had he ever really loved her? Had he ever really loved me? The question left a bitter taste in my mouth, stronger than the wine. I picked up the phone again, fingers moving before my brain could catch up. "Do you know where she is now?" Elise responded a few minutes later. "I think she's in Oregon. I don't talk to her much. But her sister, Kate, was always protective. You might find her on Facebook. She might talk to you." I thanked her, though I wasn't sure what for. Maybe for seeing me. For finally telling the truth. For breaking the wall of silence I'd been trapped behind all week. Once the message thread ended, I opened Facebook and searched. Kate Hart. It wasn't hard to find. She looked just like Amanda, soft brown eyes, a calm sort of beauty. I hesitated only a moment before sending her a message. "Hi, Kate. I'm Natalie. I'm married to Brian, or was. I'm not reaching out to cause drama. Elise told me what happened with Amanda, and I need to know I'm not crazy." Did they do the same thing to her? It felt desperate, but it was honest. I set the phone down, not expecting a reply anytime soon. But just 20 minutes later, it buzzed again. "Hi, Natalie. I've been waiting for this message for 5 years." My chest tightened. "Yes," she wrote. They isolated Amanda. Every holiday. Every visit. It started small, like little jabs or forgotten invites. But then it got worse. They'd plan whole trips without her, then act like she was overreacting. Brian would tell her, "That's just how my parents are." He always took their side. Always. My throat burned. Amanda loved him, she continued. She tried to win them over. She bent herself into pieces. But no matter what she did, she was always too emotional, too opinionated, not classy enough. Until she finally left. She chose herself. "I'm guessing you just did the same." I let the words settle over me. It was like someone had been following me with a mirror, and now, finally, I could see everything behind me. The breadcrumbs I'd ignored. The red flags I'd folded into origami swans. I thanked her. She responded with a simple heart. After that, I sat in silence, the wine forgotten, my hands folded in my lap. My reflection caught in the dark glass of the hotel window. I looked tired, yes, but also clear-eyed. This wasn't a holiday gone wrong. It was a pattern, a legacy, a system designed to expel anyone who threatened the illusion of perfection. Brian wasn't neutral, he was compliant. And I had been the latest in a long line of women deemed disposable by a family who clung to control like oxygen. They had done it before, and they would do it again. But not to me. Not anymore. I turned off the lamp, slid into bed, and pulled the covers up to my chin. Outside, the snow still fell. But for the first time since arriving in Colorado, I didn't feel cold. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains in soft ribbons, bathing the hotel suite in a golden hush. I lay still in bed, eyes open, watching the light move slowly across the ceiling. The silence felt different now, not lonely, not empty, just still. For the first time in days, my chest didn't feel tight. No tightrope of expectation, no cautious hope that maybe today would be different. I already knew it wouldn't, and that clarity brought a strange sort of calm. I reached for my phone and found a new message waiting from Kate. Just let me know if you ever want to talk. Amanda's doing well now. She's happy. It took her a long time, but she finally sees it wasn't her fault. I read the words again, slowly, as if they could stitch something inside me. I thought about Amanda, a stranger by all accounts, and yet her story felt like an echo of my own. Same scenes, different Christmas. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened a new tab and typed in Amanda's name. Her profile came up immediately, public enough for me to see glimpses of her life. Her smile was radiant in every picture. Standing next to a golden retriever. Hiking a trail somewhere in Oregon. Posing with a group of women who looked like they adored her. She looked free. I hesitated, then sent a friend request. No message. No explanation. Just a quiet extension of connection, in case she ever felt like reaching back. Then I returned to Kate's inbox and typed, "I'm ready to know everything. Anything you can tell me, please." She responded almost immediately. "I'll start with this. Amanda never wanted to leave Brian. She just didn't have a choice. She thought marriage meant partnership. But with him, it meant tolerating cruelty and pretending it didn't hurt. Every holiday, she was pushed further out until she wasn't even in the room anymore." Sound familiar? I nodded silently to the screen, lips pressed tight. Kate went on. Gerald and Marlene made her feel like a guest in her own marriage. They'd talk over her at dinner, plan trips and not tell her, make comments about her clothes, her job, even her voice. And Brian? He'd tell her not to be so sensitive. Not to cause a scene. Same script, different actress. The comparison sent a cold shock down my spine. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed my discomfort. All the moments I'd chosen silence for the sake of peace. The dinners where I'd smiled while being ignored. The sleigh ride I hadn't been invited to. The breakfast table set for 3. I was never imagining it. I wasn't too emotional. I wasn't too much. I was simply inconvenient to people who only loved what they could control. I took a shaky breath, tears pricking behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from release. Like a dam cracking open inside me, not with destruction, but relief. The truth had a shape now, a voice, a name. I wasn't the first. I hadn't failed. I had just stepped into the role they'd prepared for someone like me, the woman who wouldn't fit their mold. I messaged Kate again. "Thank you for trusting me with this." She replied, "I'm glad someone finally asked. I think you're stronger than you know." Amanda lost herself before she walked away. You're walking while you still know who you are. That matters. I stared at the message for a long time. It felt like something I should write on a wall. I got up, showered slowly, and dressed in a thick sweater and jeans. As I tucked my hair into a soft knit hat, I caught my reflection in the mirror. There was a faint weariness in my eyes, but also something new, a steadiness, a quiet defiance. I walked to a nearby cafe for breakfast, my boots crunching over the snow-covered sidewalk. Inside, the place smelled like espresso and cinnamon. The warmth hugged me as I ordered a croissant and coffee, and I sat by the window watching the world wake up around me. Somewhere up in Aspen, Brian and his parents were probably scrambling. No chalet. No spa. No dinner. No wife. I smiled slightly at the thought. My phone vibrated again. A new number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello? A pause. Then a woman's voice, low, calm, and unmistakably familiar. Hi, this is Amanda. My breath caught in my throat. Hi. I saw your request. Kate told me what's been going on. I just wanted to say, you're not alone. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you for reaching out. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she said gently. I've been you. I know how it feels to love someone who refuses to protect you. To believe that if you're just patient enough, kind enough, quiet enough, they'll choose you. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. And they never do. No, Amanda said. They never do. Silence stretched between us, soft but full. Then she added, I used to think I wasn't enough. That I just wasn't good at being part of a family. But it was never about me. It was about their power. And Brian, he just didn't want to rock the boat. Even if that meant watching me drown. My throat tightened. That's exactly how it feels. You don't owe them your silence, she said. Or your suffering. You don't have to carry their shame. I blinked back tears. I felt so crazy. Like I was imagining it. You weren't, she said. They just trained you to believe you were. We talked for nearly an hour, two strangers bound by the same scars. She told me about the Christmas she left, how freeing it was to finally stop explaining herself. How she'd built a life on her own terms. How happy felt different when it wasn't conditional. When we finally hung up, I stared out the cafe window and let the quiet return. But this time, it wasn't silence filled with doubt. It was the sound of a door finally opening. And I was ready to walk through it. The next morning, I woke to a knock on the hotel room door, not the soft kind, but firm and deliberate, the kind that comes with authority. I slipped on my robe, heart suddenly ticking faster, and approached cautiously. Through the peephole, I saw two uniformed officers. My breath caught. I opened the door halfway. Can I help you? Ma'am. One of them said politely, Are you Natalie Carson? Yes. We're with the Denver Police Department. There was a missing person report filed yesterday. A man named Brian Carson reported his wife missing. Are you safe? Safe. The word struck me with unexpected warmth. I nodded slowly. Yes, I'm safe. I left voluntarily. Are you in danger? Do you need assistance of any kind? No, I said firmly. I'm staying here under my own will. My husband knew I left. I spoke to him last night. The officers exchanged a quick glance. All right, the taller one said, relaxing slightly. We'll close the case then. Apologies for the early visit, ma'am. These things can't be ignored. I understand. Thank you for checking. They left with quiet nods, boots thudding softly down the carpeted hall. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So that was Brian's next move, escalation. Control disguised as concern. He hadn't called to check if I was okay. He hadn't begged me to come back. He went straight to the police. I laughed softly under my breath. Classic. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the Denver streets slowly come to life. The weight of the morning hadn't fully sunk in yet, but I knew what was coming next. If Brian had involved the police, it meant the gloves were off. The first text came 20 minutes later. Marlene, you embarrassed us. This has gone too far. I stared at the screen, emotionless. Not are you okay? Not please come home. Just shame. The shame of exposure, of optics, of the carefully polished image now showing cracks. Then another. Marlene, you made Brian involve the police. You made this worse than it had to be. I almost replied. Almost. But then I saw the next one, and everything in me turned to steel. Marlene, if you don't return by tonight, Brian will make this very difficult for you. There it was. The real message beneath all the pretense. Not a request. A threat. I set the phone down slowly, the anger building in me not as a flame, but as something colder. Sharper. Not rage, but clarity. There was no misunderstanding anymore. No illusion of miscommunication. They knew exactly what they were doing. And I was done pretending I didn't. I walked to the mirror, stared at myself for a long time. My face looked different now, calmer, but with something harder underneath. The kind of look forged in fire and ice. They wanted a reaction. A retreat. Instead, I reached for my laptop and opened a new tab. The hotel offered conference rooms for private events. I booked one for the next morning. Spacious, well-lit, with enough seats for 5. Then I sent out the invites. To Brian, Gerald, Marlene, Elise. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Hyatt Conference Room C. One conversation. Face to face. You've all had your say. Now it's my turn. Within minutes, Elise responded. Elise, I'll be there. Brian's response came last. Brian, why are you doing this? Can't we just talk privately? I didn't answer. Because no, we couldn't. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't a marriage quietly dissolving in the dark. This was a pattern. A legacy of harm. And if I had to be the one to call it out, then so be it. That evening, I prepared, not with anger, but with precision. I printed Kate's messages, highlighted the details. I created a timeline of the trip, every instance of exclusion logged. I reviewed Amanda's words. I even screenshotted Marlene's texts. If they wanted a war, I'd show up not with weapons, but with truth. My phone buzzed again, just past 8. Brian, you're being cruel. I laughed out loud this time. Cruel? After everything? I didn't reply. I powered down the phone completely and slipped it into the drawer. Let them sit in the silence for once. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, crawled under the duvet, and stared at the ceiling. Snow was falling again, thick, heavy flakes that clung to the windows like soft punctuation. I thought about the girl who had arrived in Aspen just days ago, her heart open and foolish, still hoping to be loved. I didn't pity her, but I didn't miss her either. She'd done her best. Now it was my turn. The morning arrived still and silver. Snow dusted the streets below like powdered sugar, and from the 12th floor, the city looked peaceful, deceptively so. Inside me, the storm had already begun. Not a hurricane, not chaos, but the clean, focused wind of resolve. Today was the day I stopped being quiet. Today was the day I told the truth out loud. I dressed with intention. No frills, no softness, black slacks, a steel gray blouse, boots that clicked confidently against marble. I tied my hair back, slick and neat, like armor. This wasn't about looking good. It was about being seen, finally, on my own terms. At 9:52, I took the elevator down to the conference floor, heart steady but alert. Room C was at the end of the hallway, sleek and modern, its frosted glass doors glowing under the ceiling lights. I pushed them open and stepped inside. The table was long, the chairs lined in quiet anticipation. Water glasses sparkled. A small tray of untouched pastries sat off to the side. I chose the seat at the head, placing my folder in front of me, fingers brushing the edges of the printed texts and highlighted messages. Facts. Evidence. Memories carved in ink. At 10:03, the door opened. Elise slipped in first, cheeks pink from the cold. Her eyes met mine immediately, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she gave me a small nod and sat at my left. Solidarity unspoken. At 10:05, they arrived. Together, of course, like a single unit. Marlene in a tailored cream coat and deep red lipstick. Gerald towering beside her, his expression unreadable. Brian followed a few steps behind, hands buried in his coat pockets, his eyes flicking across the room as if hoping this wasn't real. I didn't rise. I didn't offer greetings. Have a seat, I said simply. They took their places, Marlene and Gerald across from me, Brian beside them, still keeping his distance. The air was thick with tension, the kind that begs to be sliced clean. I called this meeting, I began, voice clear, because I'm done speaking into silence. Brian opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. You've had your turn. All of you have. Now it's mine. Marlene leaned back, arms crossed. Natalie, if this is about the trip. It's about everything, I said flatly. But yes, let's start there. I opened the folder and pulled out a sheet. First night, Gerald requested I sit separately at dinner. Brian said, and I quote, "It's just how they do things." The next morning, I woke up to find everyone had eaten without me. Then came the ski trip, the sleigh ride, the holiday party, all without me. Gerald scoffed, already shifting in his seat. "You're keeping a ledger?" "Yes," I said, "I study." Because when you're constantly made to question your reality, records become protection. Marlene rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be dramatic." Elise spoke for the first time. "She's not being dramatic. She's telling the truth." That caught them off guard. I turned to Marlene. "You ignored me every day. You looked through me. And when I left, you didn't ask if I was safe. You accused me of embarrassing you." Marlene's jaw clenched. "You disappeared without warning. We thought something happened. You didn't call to check. You had the police show up at my door." Brian finally leaned forward. "Nat, please." "We were scared." "No, Brian. You were inconvenienced." My voice broke a little, but I didn't let it falter. "You didn't fight for me. Not once. I told you how alone I felt, and you shrugged it off. You said I was overreacting. You protected them. Always." He looked down, jaw tight. "I didn't know what to do. You could have chosen me. But you didn't." I pulled out the next page. "Do you remember Amanda? Your first wife?" Marlene's eyes narrowed. Gerald stiffened. "Of course you do," I said. "Because you did the same thing to her. And she left, just like I did. Only difference is, I found the truth before I broke." Marlene bristled. "You don't know anything about that marriage." "I know enough," I said. "Because I spoke to her. And I spoke to Kate. And Elise confirmed it. You've been running the same playbook for years. Degrade, isolate, erase. You make women feel small until they walk away, and then you blame them for leaving. You're making us out to be monsters," Gerald snapped. "If the shoe fits," Elise muttered. Brian put his head in his hands. "God, I can't do this." I turned to him, voice trembling but true. "You already did. You let them push me out. And now you're acting like the victim because I stopped making it easy." Silence fell. Marlene looked everywhere but at me. Gerald folded his arms like a statue. Brian stared at the table like it could save him. I leaned back in my chair. "This isn't about salvaging anything. I didn't call you here to fix it. I called you here so I could finally say it to your faces. You failed me. You treated me like nothing. And you expected me to take it quietly. But I won't." Marlene's lips curled. "So what, Natalie? You want applause?" "No," I said. "I want freedom." I gathered my papers, placed them back in the folder. "I won't be coming back. Not to this marriage. Not to this family. You can keep your cold traditions, your polished dinners, your selective love. I'm done." Brian looked up sharply. "Wait, what?" "I'm filing for divorce," I said evenly. "You didn't just lose your reservations this Christmas. You lost your wife." Marlene's face twisted in disbelief. "Over this?" "Because of all of this," I replied. "Because I deserve better. And I'm finally brave enough to walk toward it." I stood. Elise rose beside me. And without another word, I walked out. I didn't look back. The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft thud, and I stood alone in the quiet glass chamber as it descended. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls. Same face, same eyes, but something had shifted. I didn't just look like a woman who had walked away. I looked like a woman who knew she would never walk back. I stepped out into the lobby, the hotel's golden warmth brushing against me like a farewell hug. Elise caught up to me a moment later, her boots clicking fast against the marble. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Actually, yeah, I am." She gave me a long look, half surprise, half respect, then tucked her gloved hands into her coat. "You were amazing in there." I offered a small smile. I didn't feel amazing, but I felt done. "That's a kind of power too," she said. We stood in the quiet entryway for a moment, the scent of pine from the lobby tree wafting gently between us. Outside, snow fluttered like confetti, slow, delicate, beautiful in its own quiet chaos. "I'll be in touch," she said. And for what it's worth, I think you saved yourself. I think so too. She hugged me, briefly but tightly, and then she was gone. I stood there a while longer before finally turning back toward the elevator. Back to my room. Back to the silence that no longer scared me. 2 hours later, the texts began. Brian, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I ignored it. Brian, I can fix this. We can go to therapy. I'll talk to them. I'll do anything. Still, I said nothing. Because I knew the truth now. His version of fixing it wasn't about me. It was about optics. About not looking like the man who let his wife walk out on Christmas. Not looking like a husband who stood by while his parents peeled back my confidence layer by layer. He wanted redemption without responsibility. But I was no longer in the business of making men feel better about the damage they refused to acknowledge. Then came the call. It rang once. Twice. I watched it vibrate on the nightstand, the screen glowing with his name. I let it ring. The voicemail came seconds later. Natalie, Brian said, his voice low, strained. You blindsided me. I know things weren't perfect, but walking out like that? That wasn't fair. We had a life together. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I didn't answer. Because if it had meant something to him, he wouldn't have spent every day of that vacation watching me be erased without saying a word. A marriage wasn't about appearances or family obligation. It was about showing up. And he hadn't. Then the tone shifted. Marlene, he's heartbroken. You've humiliated him. He doesn't deserve this. It was almost laughable. As if humiliation was worse than being abandoned in plain sight. As if Brian's broken ego outweighed the months I'd spent trying to belong, only to be treated like a stranger at my own table. Gerald, this is overreaction, plain and simple. You're emotional. You'll regret this. That was their last mistake, assuming regret would be mine to carry. Because as I stood at the window, the city twinkling beneath me, I realized something I hadn't been able to see before. I was finally free. Not just from the cold silence of his family, but from the quieter betrayal of his passivity. I had waited too long for someone to choose me, and now I was choosing myself. When the sun began to set, casting the hotel room in amber light, I opened my suitcase and started folding my clothes into it. Not out of urgency, but with purpose. My room was paid through the week, but I didn't need it. My plans were no longer built around hiding. I was ready to move forward. Each sweater, each pair of jeans, each scarf carried the weight of who I had been just days ago, the woman who thought if she smiled enough, served enough, stayed quiet enough, she could earn a seat at the table. But that woman no longer existed. I folded her away with the rest of it. I paused only once, my hand brushing the green velvet dress I'd worn that first night. The night Gerald asked me to sit at a different table. The night Brian shrugged and told me not to make it a thing. I lifted the dress, held it up in the soft glow of the lamp. It was beautiful, and I would never wear it again. I laid it across the bed, not out of grief, but respect. That version of me had tried her best. I was proud of her for that. My phone buzzed once more. Brian, please don't do this. I can't lose you. But he already had. I typed my only reply, you never fought for me. Not once. Then I blocked the number. I walked down to the front desk, checked out, and arranged for a car to take me to a temporary apartment I'd found nearby. Furnished, quiet, private. Just mine. As I waited in the lobby, I looked up at the Christmas tree towering beside the fireplace. Families gathered around it. Couples posed for pictures. Children tugged at their parents' coats with excitement. And for the first time, I didn't ache watching them. I didn't long for something I never really had. Instead, I felt full. Not with joy exactly, but with certainty. They had broken something in me, but not me. And as I stepped outside into the soft, falling snow, the flakes catching in my hair and lashes, I whispered to myself something I hadn't said in a long time. Merry Christmas, Natalie. Not because it was perfect. Not because it was peaceful. But because it was finally mine. The new apartment smelled like fresh paint and possibility. It was small, just a one-bedroom nestled in a quiet Denver neighborhood with creaky hardwood floors and a kitchen that got too much sun in the morning, but it was mine. Every inch of it belonged to me, and that was something no one could take away. It had taken 6 months. 6 long, exhausting, liberating months. The divorce was as tedious and predictable as I expected it to be. Brian wavered between begging and bullying, denial and guilt. One week, he'd send long messages filled with apologies and half-measured insights. I should have stood up to them. I was scared. I didn't know how. The next, he'd pivot to accusations: you gave up too fast, or you made everything worse. But I never replied. Not once. I had said everything I needed to say in that hotel conference room. Anything after that would only reopen a door I had sealed shut for good. In the end, he didn't contest the paperwork. Whether it was shame, exhaustion, or finally realizing I wouldn't bend, I didn't know. But when the final signature was in place and the envelope dropped into the mailbox, I felt a quiet ripple move through me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was stillness. Peace. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Elise invited me to brunch. We met at a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a plant shop, the kind of place with chipped mugs and honey in tiny glass jars. She greeted me with a tight hug and a bright-eyed smile. "You look light," she said, tilting her head as I slipped out of my coat. "I feel light," I admitted. Over coffee and pancakes, we talked about everything: her job, her new apartment, my favorite walking trail near Sloan Lake. For a while, the conversation danced around what had happened, like a delicate animal we weren't quite ready to name. But then Elise looked up from her plate and said, "They're falling apart, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "The family," she clarified. "You cracked something open when you left. Brian's finally seeing them for who they are, but it's too late. He keeps trying to rewrite history, but it's like he can't outrun what he let happen." I didn't feel joy in that. I didn't feel vindicated. I just nodded. He always thought he could float above it all. Stay neutral. But silence always chooses a side. Elise sighed and stirred her coffee. "You know, I used to think the only way to survive our family was to blend in. Be agreeable. But you," she smiled, "you reminded me that there's power in walking away." That afternoon, I stopped by the plant shop next door and bought a fern. I named her Junie and placed her by my bedroom window, where she'd catch the morning light. It was a small thing, but it felt like ceremony, claiming space, choosing something alive and green and growing. By mid-spring, the apartment began to feel like home. I replaced the neutral beige curtains with soft green linen ones. I filled the bookshelves with poetry, cookbooks, and dog-eared novels. I hung art, pieces I loved, not once chosen to impress guests or match someone else's taste. Every corner told my story now. Not ours. Mine. I started freelancing again. Nothing big at first, just copy edits and blog posts for a local travel site. But soon, I was writing more. Not just for money, but for myself. I started journaling again, late at night with a candle burning beside me, words pouring out like thawed snow rushing downhill. One snowy night in early December, almost a year after Aspen, I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the flakes drift past the window. The world was quiet. No carolers, no chaotic dinners, no ice-cold expectations. Just me, a cup of mint tea, and the faint hum of the heater. That's when the message came. A single notification. "Brian, I see it now. I'm sorry." 7 words. 7 months too late. I stared at it for a moment, not angry, not sad. Just distant. Detached. That version of me, the one who might have cried reading those words, who would have clung to the apology like a rope thrown overboard, she no longer existed. I didn't even hesitate. I deleted the message and blocked the number. There was no rage in it. No vengeance. Just closure. Because I didn't need his apology to validate my story. I didn't need him to say I was right in order to know I was. That power didn't belong to him anymore. The next morning, I baked cranberry scones for the first time in months. I played Nat King Cole in the kitchen and let the music drift through the apartment like incense. I opened the windows and let the cold air kiss my cheeks. I took my time. Later, I bundled up and walked to the park nearby, where the trees wore frost like lace and the ground sparkled with untouched snow. I sat on a bench, my gloved hands wrapped around a thermos, and breathed in the crisp air. I didn't need a grand finish. I didn't need a new romance or a dramatic transformation. I had already done the bravest thing I could do. I chose myself. For years, I had molded myself to fit into other people's stories, trying to earn love by shrinking. But not anymore. I wasn't smaller now, I was clearer, sharper, whole. As the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, I looked up at the sky and whispered the simplest of truths. I'm free. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I really was.